Diogwit, Akara. I am George from Era. Anyway, behind me is number 22 Hants Place in London and the Knightsbridge area. So this is where the Sinn Fein delegation stayed in 1921. You may know that from January 1919 until the 11th of July 1921, there was a conflict in Ireland. The Irish Republican Army started attacking the Crown forces. The first action was at Solohead Beg in County Tipperary, where two Royal Irish Constabulary officers were shot dead by an IRA unit, including Dan Breen, Seamus Robinson, and a few others. And they would be delivering quarry. They'd been sort of guarding a delivery of gelignite to a quarry. Gelignite's an explosive. You can see why people would want to get their hands in it if they're up to no good. So you can read about it in my Fight for Irish Freedom by Dan Breen. It gives a terse account of it, claiming they called them upon to surrender. They didn't, and so they were shot. It's surprising the lack of detail there. It makes me suspect there's a certain economy of truth to his account, because in other accounts of actions, he limbs it in much greater depth. So a success for the IRA, you might think, except not, since the gelignite was recovered and the cart and the horse a very short time later. So was the objective actually to kill the men and not to steal the gelignite? Breen says, we wanted to start a war. The only way to do that is to kill someone. So there we go. So that was the same day that Dáil Éireann met in Dublin in the Mansion House. It's the mayor's residence. Alfie Byrne, a Labour man, was an enthusiastic advocate of the cause of separating Ireland from the United Kingdom. Anyway, so the conflict carried on, and then there was a truce, 11th of July 1921, as in notably it was a day before what the Orange Order called the Glorious 12th, but I don't think there was any particular significance to that. There had been peace feelers put out in late 1920, particularly the Archbishop of Perth, Australia was involved because his nephew Conor Clune had been killed by the Crown forces. Not that he was an IRA man. I think it was right after that bloody Sunday incident in Dublin where 14 alleged Crown agents were shot dead. I think most of them were informers for the Crown. And then members of the Royal Irish Constabulary, auxiliaries in particular, I think, went to Croke Park where they thought the gunmen might be hiding. There was a disputed incident, but in the end, 14 people were shot dead by the auxiliaries. Civilians, I think all of them unarmed, so which obviously was dreadful and was also terrible for the Crown Forces' reputation in Ireland, which prior to 1919 had not been bad. Anyway, so the conflict was tentatively over, and so Sinn Fein had controlled every seat in the 26 counties. Remember, Home Rule was actually granted to Ireland, but in two parts, of the north and for the south. And there was going to be a Parliament of Southern Ireland meeting in Dublin, as in for the 26 counties. And an election was held for this Home Rule Parliament, but there was only one candidate for every single seat, the most bizarre election of all time. So they were all elected unopposed, including in Trinity College Dublin, I think it was 4 Unionists. And so the Home Rule Parliament for the south of Ireland actually met, although, in a bitter irony, the Unionists were the only ones who've shown up. The ones who didn't want Home Rule for exactly the opposite reasons that Sinn Fein didn't want it, because the Unionists wanted a full-blooded union, and and Sinn Fein wanted to break every connection between Great Britain and Ireland. But anyway, it was obviously a dead letter. So, and of course, being part of the United Kingdom, everyone in Ireland still elected members of Parliament to Westminster here. So they're trying to draw a conflict to a close. I'm not sure what the machinations were behind the scenes. What was the back channel they used to negotiate? Possibly the Catholic Church. But anyway, so a truce kicked in, and the Sinn Fein MP, some were going to be invited here in London to a parley with a view to ending the conflict. Well, here we are, a century on, and it's not quite over. Obviously, there's some dissident Republicans who still want to restart the conflict, despite the settled will of the great majority of people in Ireland to remain at peace, and despite most people accepting in Northern Ireland that they are part of the United Kingdom. That could only change if a majority in the North wanted it to change. Anyway, so on what basis could these Sinn Fein MPs be invited here? Obviously, Sinn Fein was really an adjunct of the IRA. Initially, Dáil Éireann had spoken out against the IRA and described what had gone on in South Tip as senseless murders. But over time, Dáil Éireann changed its mind and said we are the government and the IRA is our army and so forth. And some people elected to Dáil Éireann, notably Michael Collins, was obviously involved in the IRA as Director of Intelligence. He wasn't leading every attack, as some breathless journalist claimed. Anyway, so they came here, but on what basis could they be invited by His Majesty's government? Said, well, they are members of Parliament, Michael Collins, Arthur Griffith, and a few others, Charles Gavin Duffy, and I can't think who else came over, Erskine Childers. They stayed here at 22 Hants Place, named after Sir Hans Sloane, who was also Irish, very distinguished physician from Killaloe, County Down. The only other famous person from that place is the gardener, the late John Cushney, who died in 2009. Anyway, so they were going to Downing Street very frequently, and they had their discussions there with the Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, with Winston Churchill, was Colonial Secretary, I believe, and a few others, Hamer Greenwood, I think. But finally, on the 6th of December 1921, a treaty was signed. Now, Eamon de Valera had come over and spoken to them, and there's a famous photo of a woman kneeling down to kiss his ring as though he was a cardinal in Downing Street. Collins also kept a plane at Croydon Aerodrome, because that was the main London airport at the time, in case negotiations went sour and he had to make a quick getaway. There was always a possibility they would fail to reach an agreement, in which case the conflict would resume. And people often say, oh, Lloyd George, he got them to sign it by browbeating them, by saying that there would be a terrible war if they didn't sign. Well, the thing is, that's always the default setting in any peace negotiations. If negotiations break down, then there's a recrudescence of the conflict. And some Republicans have tried to vitiate this treaty on the basis that it was signed under duress. Well, all peace agreements are signed under duress because there's been fighting beforehand. Right? By this rationale, no peace agreement in the world would ever stand, and we'd have to fight till the bitter end. Anyway, so signed it was, and they went back to Dublin. And Cathal Brugh suggested they be immediately arrested and arraigned for high treason because of what they'd agreed to, that the 6 counties would remain part of Northern Ireland, that the Crown Forces could retain 3 bases in the south, and in time of war-strained relations get more. Obviously, we were leaving the United Kingdom, but we're going to have to pay off a bit of the national debt and various other things. Oh yeah, an oath of loyalty to His Gracious Majesty King George V, and he was accorded the title King of Ireland. Yeah, that's right. Okay, Michael Collins, who was chairman of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, or the Supreme Council of Fenians, you can call it, he swore an oath of loyalty to King George V, the King of Ireland. Now, I can't remember which Republican was it. Was it Cathal Brugh or was it Erskine Childers said this? If we ratify this treaty, that means that we are voluntarily agreeing that the British monarch is also our sovereign. And yeah, we did voluntarily agree that. Every single person in the Parliament of Southern Ireland was a Sinn Feiner, every single one. And there were a lot of ructions about it before Christmas 1921, but crucially a vote wasn't taken. It was postponed till the new year. So they say that if a vote had been held immediately, they would have voted against it. Because people were quite obdurate, but these MPs, they went back to their constituencies, they spoke to the local people, most of them who were quite satisfied with it. They were not doctrinaire Republicans. They thought if they were inclined towards republicanism, they got the substance of what they wanted, as Collins would put it, the freedom to achieve freedom. Okay, the main thing was there would be a legislature in Dublin, and in the major part of Ireland, we would make our own laws, and that was that. And most of the Crown Forces would be out of Ireland. There'd be only 3 bases in the south. Obviously in the north would still be part of the UK. But partition was already there really from the Government of Ireland Act 1914. The Home Rule Party had reluctantly agreed to it as a temporary measure, but these temporary measures have a habit of becoming permanent. And obviously the Government of Ireland Act 1920 set up Parliament for Northern Ireland, getting Home Rule within the UK. The only place in Ireland where most people were against Home Rule is the only bit that got it. And yet another curious irony, where it's like John Pentland Mahaffey said that in Ireland the inevitable never occurs and the impossible constantly happens, something like that. Anyway, it's passed by a majority of 7 in Dáil Éireann, which was previously the Parliament of Southern Ireland, but people started simply calling it Dáil Éireann. Obviously, it wasn't the Oireachtas as such because it was unicameral, and won't go through the whole story, but the British Army evacuated most of its bases in the south of Ireland, handed them over to the nascent Irish Army, or Free State Army, as often called in those days. But conflict broke out in June 1922 for various reasons. Sir Henry Wilson, one of the most illustrious Irishmen of the epoch, he was shot dead here in London, only about half a mile from where I stand, by two IRA men, Reggie Dunn and Sullivan. I can't remember the Sullivan's Christian name. Possibly at the behest of Collins. Was it an order sometime previously that he'd forgotten to cancel, and these two guys were sent to the gallows. But so anyway, the UK government demanded that this new Irish government, the provisional government, do something about the IRA, which had taken over loads of bases. So some bases at Royal Irish Constabulary Barracks have been taken over by the Irish Army, and some by the IRA. And then Ginger O'Connell, an Irish Army officer, was kidnapped by the IRA, taken to the forecourts in Dublin, where the IRA were holed up. And because I think the Irish government had arrested whoever it was, one of the anti-treaty guys, and so finally an ultimatum was issued at the summer solstice 1922, and then the IRA forecourts didn't surrender, and using artillery lent by the British Army, bombardment commenced. Well, that's it. That's what the Sinn Fein delegation was.